Alright guys, welcome back. In our last video we talked about what nationalism was, nation states, nation itself, and today we're going to apply that by looking at some revolutions that are going to break out across Europe in 1848, very important year in European history. So we're going to talk about the causes and effects of those revolutions. As a quick review, we learned in our last video that nationalism is the sense of belonging to and pride in a group. We learned that a nation is a group of people with a common unifying culture and heritage. And number 3, we learned that a nation state exists when a nation has its own territory and independence from other groups. So nationalism is growing across Europe in the early 1800s. People are upset by being ruled by foreigners and also being ruled by strong monarchies. And so we're going to see some revolutions break out in 1848. And we're going to begin with France. Yes, another French Revolution, believe it or not. And if you recall, the original French Revolution had a lot of causes, things like corruption, the Enlightenment, debt, high bread prices, and so forth. This 1848 French Revolution has some similarities and also, of course, some key differences. So 1848, here's the situation in France. In 1846, a recession had hit France, and 2 years later the economy of France was still very poor. Factories are shutting down, people are losing their jobs, people are going hungry, bread prices are skyrocketing, and so you have a lot of desperate, hungry people in France. And that year, in February of 1848, a revolution occurs, which is known as the February Days Revolution, where angry protesters rose up and they overthrew their king, King Louis Philippe, the guy on the right, who actually was a cousin of King Louis XVI, the guy who was killed during the original French Revolution. Like the original French Revolution, this revolution of 1848 is going to lead away from monarchy and into embracing a republic, which means we need an election. And later that year, an election occurred in which the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, the guy we spent so much time on in our first unit, becomes the president of France. So Louis Napoleon Bonaparte is his name. He's the new president of France. We will come back and talk about him and what happens to him next. Before that, though, let's look at how revolution spreads across Europe. So the example of France is going to be very inspirational to the people across Europe. They're all, well, I shouldn't say all, but many are going to rise up in nationalist revolutions. And so the fear of the kings and queens of Europe is that revolution that broke out in France could come for them next, and they can lose their crown or maybe even their life. So they're panicking. Now, the Austrian Empire, if you recall, is all of this in all these different colors. It was led by Germans, and the other different nations or groups of people had no real say in the empire. That's going to lead to a nationalist revolt. Specifically, a group called the Czechs are going to revolt up here, and then Hungarians down here are going to revolt against the Austrian Empire. Let me go back to the map here. This area right over here, you'll notice, is the people who live there, rather, are Italians. They are also going to rise up. So this area right here in northern Italy, they're going to try to fight to kick the Austrians out of northern Italy. Italian nationalists, that is going to be doing that. Now, there was no Germany at this time, or rather there was what we call the German states, so a bunch of different independent German states, like the Kingdom of Prussia, the Kingdom of Bavaria, and so forth. And being that there was no unified Germany, German nationalists felt that they should do something about that. They're going to rise up in 1848 demanding unification of the German states to create one unified, strong Germany. Now, turns out a lot of these revolutions are in fact going to fail. So let's look at the failures of the revolution of 1848. Now, if you recall, the president of France after the revolutions of 1848 was this guy right here, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. Like his more famous uncle, he decides being, president or whatever you want to call their title, that's just not good enough. They want something more. And so what Louis Napoleon does is he He basically holds an election of sorts, a plebiscite, asks the French voters, do you want me to reestablish the monarchy and become your emperor? And they say yes. This is pretty much exactly what his uncle had done. And now we have the monarchy back, and we have another Napoleon. Napoleon III. Again, Louis Napoleon, now known as Napoleon III, Emperor of France. We learned that nationalism had greatly weakened the Austrian Empire, but Austria is able to kind of rally the troops and crush those nationalist revolts. The Czech revolt, the Hungarian revolt, the Italian revolt, they all are crushed by Austria. The German rebels, if you recall, had demanded German unity. Were they successful? Well, they had a chance. What happens is, in reaction to those revolutions, German states send delegates to something called the Frankfurt Assembly in Frankfurt, Germany, and there the delegates announced that they were going to offer up the crown of a unified Germany to the King of Prussia, Frederick William IV. But Frederick William IV turned down the crown of a unified Germany because it came from the people. He didn't see the people as having the power to offer him a crown, so he turns it down. He said he would only take it from the princes of the German states, not the people. So the German Revolution, you can argue, is like those other revolutions, a bit of a failure. So we saw revolutions fail across Europe, and it would be easy to write all these revolutions off and say, well, they all failed, so who cares? But even though they fail in the short term, in the long term, what happens is that these revolutions keep nationalism alive, and they're going to push towards greater unification in places like Italy and Germany. So, again, those revolutions of 1848, they're going to have ripple effects all throughout the 1800s and even into the 1900s as well. All right, so that was it for revolutions. In our next video, we're going to talk about how the Italian states unified into one nation state called Italy.